And this is Bobby, and we'll be calling our first video type video meeting to order. And I guess everybody, I think on the call knows everybody, but the committee could introduce themselves to get us started. You want to start with Brian, and we'll work our way like we normally do?
Thank you, Bobby. Senator Brian Collmore from the Rutland District.
Morning, everyone. Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Bobby Starr, Essex Orleans District.
Chris Pearson from Chittenden.
And Anthony Polina from Washington County.
Well, and so anyways, I wanted to thank the committee members for coming together in regards to this meeting. We have the Agency of Ag on the line with us, and Anson, I guess we're gonna lead off with you because we know that you're very busy and that you may have to leave the meeting. So we'll get started with you in regards to, we've got, I think you did get a copy of the agenda. We wanted to, can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
We wanted to get an update from you, Anson, in regards to where things are with ag, and then talk about some specific subjects with different members of your staff, like the H2A and the school lunch program and the milk issue.
Sure. Well, thank you all, and thank you for the opportunity to update you on what's happening out in the world since we last met in person. So I'm going to begin just with the overall message that we're all working on in the administration. That is the most important goal right now is the health of all Vermonters, and we're all focused on stay home, stay safe. And it's a difficult challenge for all of us because we're not used to that. We wake up every morning wired to go to work, and the message is not to go to work right now. And we all want to visit family and friends and gather. So we have changed directions in many circles around Vermont, including agriculture. This is something that we have never experienced before. We are focused on slowing the spread of the virus and also not to overwhelm the healthcare system. But there are still many that are working, the farmers, the producers, the truck drivers, the clerks, those that stock the shelves, the workers who are producing the food for Vermont and of course the world. And we're also thankful for all those in healthcare right now who are working nonstop. Many of them in harm's way. So we salute what they're doing and their commitment to their community and their state of Vermont. In a moment, you'll hear more detail from some of our staff members here at the agency about what's happening on the landscape in much more detail. But in short, it's not pretty. We're trying to get the best information to everyone out there, get information about resources and advice to the public. We began immediately after it was pretty clear we were headed towards this pandemic, and we began working with anyone that was involved in agriculture. And our agriculture development division has been working nonstop to try to get us updated data from the field of what's happening out there and how we can adapt and change and help them and support them. I just want to give you a few highlights from agriculture based on some of the market closes and changes that have occurred, primarily from the last 11 or 12 days. Immediately, the Agriculture Development Division went out and got a survey started, and they got 64 responses. This was between March 19th and March 31st. And this data captures each business in a moment of time. And we also have to keep in mind things do change by the day and by the hour in some of this, but this gives you a perspective of what may have been happening between March 19th and March 31st. We surveyed 64 businesses. 9% of those reported closing their businesses. 43% reported being partially open, and the rest fully operational. Businesses reported the impact of COVID-19 on their employment ranging from 0 to 100% loss of employees. And the average mean loss of employees per business was about 22%. Businesses reported their estimated economic losses totaling more than $8.2 million over those 64 businesses, with about $25,000 per business losing money over that 11-day period. The closures of restaurants, significant impact on reduction in the amount of local food purchased. Farm to Plate has estimated that, over a year's time, about $9.7 million of local food goes into local restaurants and using local products. And of course, that has dried up completely across the landscape. The closure of educational institutions also has impacted local food. Colleges, particularly, some school meals are being prepared and delivered at home to K through 12 students, but clearly that's been a decline as well. Grocery stores, they are seeing increased consumer demand and, of course, having difficulty at times to keep up with all that demand. It's not a pretty sight right now for what's happening in dairy. Initially, there was a lot of fluid milk that was being processed and stocked at the shelves, and there was a tremendous increase of that. That is slowed at this time, and a real challenge for our dairy farmers. The worst months for dairy, we believe, are going to be now until August. The forecasting across the country, dramatic decline in price paid to farmers on the dairy landscape because consumption is gone so far down, and there's so much milk out there. We're really concerned about every single dairy farmer in Vermont. We have over 654 of them, and all of them are feeling the impact of this immediately. On dairy as well, cheesemakers, they have market losses depending on which channel they were in and where they were distributing their product. For those who are in the restaurant and sales to restaurants, specialty stores, or events such as weddings, they're seeing about an 80% loss or greater. That's common for our cheesemakers. For those who sell direct through farmers markets, farm stores, or online sales, they have been impacted as well. Some are weathering that fine. Some have even seen increases in sales at some of our farm stores and our online sales, but clearly it's a hit or miss depending on what market you're there. Grocery store sales loss depend heavily on what kind of cheese. The cheeses that are cut and wrapped in store have taken the hardest hit, as stores have had to reduce their staff and they no longer can prepare that cheese in the store. So they've taken a hit there. Some cheesemakers have reported losses in tens of thousands of dollars, while others have lost upwards of $100,000 in just 2 weeks' time. The projections for the next 6 to 8 weeks indicate there could be catastrophic losses for many of our cheesemakers, upwards of $500,000 for some, and for others, a complete collapse of their business without some incoming funds. Produce, I'll talk about that a little bit. It is the beginning of planting and greenhouse season in anticipation of their summer markets. There are some concerns about H-2A labor and the workforce there. Deputy Eastman will speak more in detail about that in just a few moments with you folks. And many producers, they're pivoting, they're recreating online order sales and connecting with the growing customer interest in that. So anything that they can limit person-to-person contact, and they can pivot and do online sales. That's what they're doing. The diversified operations, online ordering options, there has been a huge surge in that sector for some of our producers and farmers, and they are putting on additional customers. That is probably the only really bright light we're seeing there. Some farm stands are seeing their top sales during this period. People staying away from the supermarkets and going to their local farm stand if it's open. So that has been encouraging there. And again, anything with online, home delivery, CSAs, avoiding person-to-person contact. And that's the key here, avoiding person-to-person contact. That model is the one that we must follow. Specialty foods, they say their sales remain strong, and they continue to do as much online as possible. So from the farm to the fork, we have some sobering issues that we're going to have to deal with over the next few weeks and months. And we've been trying to figure out where the help is going to come from. We're analyzing the bill that was passed in Congress, the CARES Act, and there are some things in there for farmers and producers that we want to keep our eye on. It does provide relief for food and some agriculture-related producers as businesses, as well as some increase in SNAP funding. And I know you've got some guests lined up to talk more about that. We're looking at all the financial resources necessary to aid the farmers and the families to get through this. It allocates more money for specialty crop producers and livestock producers. And the livestock producers does include dairy, who supply our food to our schools and our institutions and restaurants and the farmers markets. It also, this act replenishes the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation, which is the funding mechanism for agriculture programs, the commodity programs, dairy programs, disaster support programs, the conservation programs, and income support programs. And the secretary in Washington, Secretary Perdue, has a fund there that he has to figure out how he's going to distribute that money over the landscape. So we're in conversations with them. We're encouraging the secretary, particularly on the dairy side, to take action as soon as possible, to buy as much product as possible. We're also encouraging the secretary, I'm circulating a letter now, to set a floor price over the next 4 months to keep things and stabilize the industry. We believe that floor price should be at least $19.50 for our farmers. He has the authority to do that. We're trying to build support for that. We know that's a heavy lift, but we think that needs to be done just to stabilize the situation over the next 4 months. So that's sort of the overview of where we're at. We do believe that some of our farmers will have some relief through the SBA program that's being rolled out. We're encouraging farmers and producers to look at the small Paycheck Protection Program loans. That's one that we think farmers will qualify for. We've been in contact with SBA, and we're trying to get as much information as possible out to our farmers about that. That seems to be the first vehicle for relief for farmers right away is going to be through the SBA. And we're working with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development on getting that information of how people can apply and get that done. There should be some news from the Farm Services Agency as well. FSA is working on some programs. I've been in contact with Wendy Wilton as well. And we'll be talking over the next couple of days as FSA may be rolling out some programs as well.
Anson, this is Allison. I think Brian has his hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Allison. I was waiting for Senator Starr to recognize me, actually, but
Well, my screen has gone black on me.
okay. Well, and Anson, this may not be directed necessarily just to you, because I think Deputy Secretary Eastman might be in a position to answer it. But I'm curious about the migrant or seasonal or temporary workers. I just want to read something that I received this morning. This has nothing to do necessarily with agriculture, But the email goes, last afternoon and early evening, my son tried to return to his home state of Vermont and was denied entry despite the fact that he's a resident of Vermont. He works in Vermont. His car is registered in Vermont. He had Vermont plates. He has a Vermont driver's license. He was stopped 6 times by state police and DOT between Pownell and Bennington and was ordered to turn around and leave the state under threat of arrest. And I'm just wondering whether this might fall into sort of a pattern where we get, unfortunately, some overzealous folks who, this could impact the workers on farms, I think, if this indeed is the policy.
Yeah, I would.
So Brian, I'm happy to answer that question as far as the migrant laborers. Specifically, I think what you might be getting at is the seasonal temporary workers, which are under the H-2A visas. And the majority of the H-2A workers in Vermont travel from Jamaica. There's likely maybe a dozen that come from Mexico. And in the last 3 weeks, we have been experiencing delay. Those delays were because of the embassy in Jamaica and also the consulates in Mexico being shut down. They took the last 2 weeks to organize their working space so that their employees within the embassies and consulates could practice social distancing and be 6 feet apart. They sent home workers that work on non-essential visas, and they are currently processing the H-2A and H-2B visas still. Workers that were set to come into Vermont with a start date of 3/17 are actually arriving today. We had confirmation that they did get on their plane in Jamaica this morning, so we should know shortly if they land in Burlington. But for the most part, the problems we have been experiencing have been due to the international travel shutdown. They were scheduled to come on a plane earlier, but because of the commercial airlines canceling, we actually had to charter a plane out of Jamaica to get them here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Senator, if you want to forward that note along, and maybe I could do some follow-up of what the public safety process is about the border checks.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I actually have already forwarded it to Kendall Smith in the governor's office.
Okay.
I mean, I was not aware that we were stopping people and having them turn around. That this is concerning to me.
Yeah, we actually heard the opposite, that they were not stopping people or not turning anybody away.
But I'd be glad to forward it to you as well.
Sure. Thank you. So just a final thought about some of the operations internally. I just give you an update of what we're all doing here. We're primarily all remote. I'm at 116 today, and there may be 2 people in the building, and mainly it's the business office. We have people checking on the mail, making sure they take money that comes in or send stuff out through the mail. So that's, or accept deliveries as well. So everyone is, and they handle that really well. We're well equipped to that. It seems to be going well with the technology. And of course, our focus is we're trying to limit all face-to-face contact with our constituents. Our inspectors, they're using best practices. And unless it's essential, we're pausing some of those routine inspections out in the field. And our federal partners have approved this action in some cases. So that's what's happening there. Emergencies, of course, we're responding to emergencies as needed, but every decision that we're making here is focused on protecting the health and safety of our workers and also the public and everyone that's in and around us. And I have to say, everyone has really risen to the challenge, and everyone is working really, really hard to ensure that there is a brighter future for our farmers and our producers and just everyone out in the public. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to serve. And I'm welcome to take some questions, senators, if you'd like, and give you updates. And I do have some other people up on deck here that can, get into some more of the nitty gritty about where the markets are headed and some of the relief programs that we're working on. We've been talking with a lot of our constituents. We've held 4 conference calls with just about everyone that touches agriculture. And we're trying to do our best to communicate because information is coming and going, and we're trying not to duplicate. We're trying to get, solid information so people can apply for benefits if they're out there, and also keep things moving. So.
And
Go ahead,
Nancy?
Anthony.
who's in charge?
Well, Bobby can't see you and Allison wasn't looking at the time that you put your hand up, so.
Okay. A couple things. Anson, I think you said earlier that the Commodity Credit Corporation was going to kind of come back alive, be put into use. And if I remember correctly, the Commodity Credit Corporation was in part the organization that would buy surplus milk and turn it into cheese or butter, whatever, store it somewhere for when it's needed later. And we've heard that people are dumping milk in certain parts of the country. And I just wonder if you think there's a possibility that the Commodity Credit Corporation would come back online and buy that surplus milk, turn it, or butter, cheese, whatever it might turn into, to be able to release it onto the market later when school comes back in session or when it's needed. I'm just wondering, is that
Yeah,
within the realm of possibility?
there's under the CARES Act, there's $14 billion that's been put into that program, and does have the mechanism to do that. And we are encouraging the secretary to use that lever for the dairy programs. And it would help to, stabilize things. If we can get it into cheese or butter and get it stored, we can get it out the door later. The problem with fluid milk is it's perishable. It's got,
Sure.
So that's the problem with that one. And I think you're going to see, other parts of the country are dumping milk. We have, and that's probably going to happen or has happened in the Northeast already. To what level, we're not quite sure. You're going to see, stories out of Florida where they're having to plow fresh produce back into the earth because they have no market for it, and they can't harvest it. And it's mainly because of the institutions that have been shut down. The colleges, they're shutting down restaurants in Florida. So you can well imagine the ripple effect of that. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see milk being dumped, but there's no place for it to go. That's where it has to go for now. We're discussing all options. If we can do something at the local level to maybe take some of that milk and get it bottled or made into yogurt and get it to the food banks as well. So we had some discussions on that as well. We just want to make sure that would serve two purposes. It would help the farmer, but would also, there's going to be a tremendous need to help our food banks and our food shelves to have a fresh product for their customers. So
yeah, I think if we could ramp up the processing, like you mentioned, make yogurt out of it, whatever it might be able to store it till school comes back into session. Yeah. I also want to remind folks who may not remember that quite a few years ago, back in the 1980s, I guess it was, when things hit bottom for a while for milk prices, the state actually paid farmers a premium. The state wrote checks to farmers to give them a little bit of extra money to put in their pockets to help them weather the storm. And you talk about the possibility of doing a floor price on the federal level, which I think would be great. But there's also maybe the possibility with CARES money coming into the state that some of that money could go into providing a premium for dairy farmers based on some kind of formula. The last time we did it, we gave them a 50-cent premium up to 1 million pounds of milk, which seems like a smidgen these days, but we were able to provide farmers with a check which represented a premium because they were going through a hard time. So I'm not saying that that's possible this time, but I think it's worth keeping in mind that we have done that in the past.
Looks like Ruth's up next.
Thanks, Brian. Anson, thank you for that overview. It's really helpful. I'm glad to hear that you're looking into ways to use the excess dairy and other farm products for helping food banks, because it seems just a sad irony that food is being plowed back into the ground or dumped when there's so many people who are in need of food right now. I know our schools are working overtime to get food out to as many families as possible. And if there's a way to get that to more food to schools, more food to food banks, and have it a win-win situation, that would be great. So if there's anything we can do as the legislature, Senate Ag Committee to help that in that, please let us know. I also had a question, just to clarify, you mentioned the CARES Act and the Small Business Association loan program, and I think you said that the Paycheck Protection Program
Is it?
was the best option for farmers. So I'm just wondering, do you have guidance on your website or anything that we could send out to constituents who are looking for it? Because I've had some questions about, do farmers qualify for the small business loans?
Yeah,
And what should we tell them?
I think is Kyle on
Laura
the
has her
line?
hand up. She might have an answer to that.
Okay.
Laura has her
Yeah,
hand up.
thank you. Laura Ginsberg, Agency of Agriculture. I just this morning confirmed with Dave Lane from Yankee Farm Credit and Sarah Isham from the Vermont Ag Credit Corporation that farms are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. That is opening today or tomorrow, excuse me, but the draft application is available online through SBA. That has to go through any SBA lender. The economic injury disaster loans, the EIDLs, farms are not eligible for these funds. And if a farm is doing value added production, they may be eligible, but both Dave and Sarah are working with partners to understand what that eligibility will look like for value added producers.
Thanks, Laura. Could you email the committee the information on the links and those programs so that we can send it out to constituents who are asking?
I sure will. I developed just a quick one-sheeter that Kyle is going to put in our auto response that contains a lot of information. So I'll make sure that that gets sent to you too.
That would be great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And we have a resource page that we can also, that link would be popular, I think, for folks to read, because there's a lot of great information on that one. We can get that to you as well.
Yeah,
be
your
great.
COVID-19 resource page, is that what you're?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've shared that out several
Okay.
times. That is really, really helpful. So thank you for putting that together.
Well, great.
Well, can I just throw out one more
Yeah.
thing? Which
Sure.
is it possible that through the SBA program, loans are not the greatest, obviously, because you got to pay them back, although there are some forgiveness programs. But is it possible that we can imagine a processor maybe wanting to expand the ability to make more yogurt or more cheese out of fluid milk, getting a loan to be able to rev up production to make that happen? I mean, I'm just thinking about whether these things are within the realm of possibility.
I think we got to explore all options. The other component of this, I was asked to serve on the Vermont Community Foundation. They have a committee now, much like they did in Irene, where they were seeking charitable donations and then giving grants out to either community organizations or so forth. So we've had some discussions with them already. Could they possibly help finance some of this? The issue is usually getting it processed. That's the cost, getting it processed. I think the food bank has a mechanism to get it distributed, but it's just a matter of, and we have some local plants that probably could do it. They could process some milk. So we're trying to put that piece together, and we've got to work really quickly on it, because we don't want to lose any more product than we have to, and we know the need is there.
Anson, by the way, Bobby's apparently having some trouble, and I've settled down at my end, so I'm happy to call on folks. Anson, back to the small business paycheck protection and all the various options that are sort of coming out of the woodwork, and it's very hard to navigate through. And I'll say for myself, and I've been paying quite a bit of attention. So can we say to folks that, can we anticipate within a week or something that somewhere on your website will be kind of a whole menu of the options? You know, if you're a food producer, here's some of the opportunities for you. If you're a dairy farmer, here's what we think you might be able to take advantage of. That kind of really stepping people through it.
Yeah, and I think Laura has started to work on that, and she's running it through Kyle Harris, who's also works for us, but also is with the Commerce Agency. So I think we've got to work really quickly and make this simple. so people understand it, because that's what we have to do. And I think Laura started that one pager, and I think that's the one we want to focus on right now, is this paycheck protection program for our farmers, because there was some debate whether they were going to be eligible or not, but I think that's been settled over the last 24 hours.
Good. And that is the one that is a loan unless you use it to pay people, in which case it becomes a grant, correct?
That's the one that can turn into a grant, correct?
Yeah, which is obviously very appealing for the reasons Senator Polina
Yeah.
mentioned. Okay, our fearless chair seems to be back.
Yeah, finally. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Finally got my rig to charging or something by using my tablet.
Yes, electricity is helpful. Well, we've just heard from Secretary Tebbet. And unless you have anything else, Anson, we can.
Yeah, that would be
move
great.
on,
I got to
I think.
hop on another call about the regional dairy situation. But we'll send you all the literature that we have, so you can have it for your constituents and the decisions that you have to make over the next few days.
So did you guys, have you covered the part about farmers signing up with small business loans where they can get up to 10 million? You've covered that?
We did.
Yeah, and you got a crew helping them with this?
Yeah, we're working on a one pager, and we'll try to get that posted and out so everyone can understand the process and who's eligible and not, so forth.
What about the H-2A workers coming in? You cover that?
And
Yeah.
that's, we got an update at Allison. She's going to hang if you want more questions on that. She's on the line. Allison Eastman's on the line, but she had a little update that I think there's some progress that's been made on that over the last 24 hours as well.
Any other questions from the committee in regards to Anson's testimony?
No, we appreciate all the hard work.
Hey, thank you very much. And we'll try to keep you posted, pick up the phone if we can help. As you know, we're all in this together, and we're going to get through it together. So thank you for your leadership. We really appreciate it.
Well, and anything we can do, Anson, if it's writing letters or, from the Senate or any of that, please let us know.
We will.
Yeah.
We will need your help. Thank you very much.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you.
Anson.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Take care. Everybody be safe. Bye-bye.
Ruth.
Yeah, I just had I don't know, Allison, if you're gonna stick around. I had a question for Allison, but I also know that we were supposed to move to Rosie Krieger at this point. So I don't know where we're at with our agenda, but should I ask my question of Allison, or should we go to Rosie? What do you think, Bobby?
Well, is it on dairy, Ruth?
Well, yeah, it's so Allison and I have been in communications a little bit, because I've been hearing from a lot of constituents about not the H-2A workers, but the sort of longer term workers at our dairy farms. And I just wanted to, she and I have talked a lot, but I just wanted to give her a chance to update everybody about what she's told me, just to make sure that these workers are getting the services they need and the protection they need during COVID-19. And because I have literally heard from dozens and dozens of people about this issue, just concerns that dairy workers just across the board are getting the information and the protection they need to make sure that they are not getting COVID-19, and if they do, that they get the services, the healthcare they need. So
Sure, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Appreciate that, Senator Hardy. We, at the agency are dedicated to making sure that we get the proper information out to our agricultural employers. And as Senator Hardy had referenced, there was some emails that our local legislators were receiving in regards to those migrant workers. We're fortunate here in Addison County to have the Open Door Clinic, and though the Open Door Clinic is currently closed, we do have information that these
Could you
workers
let
still
Bobby
have
know
access.
we really, this is Linda. Could you
Yeah.
let Bobby know we really need to get to Rosie and Jim Desmarais, because Rosie has to leave at 11:30. So, and then
Okay.
Allison and these other questions
Oh,
can.
I can
happen
wait.
at
We're fine.
I know he
Yeah.
is, but I can't talk to him directly.
I can hear you now.
Tell him we
Linda.
need to move on to Rosie because she has to leave at 11:30. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We got it. Thanks,
Bye.
Linda.
Can you guys
Bobby,
hear
did
me?
did you hear that, Bobby?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it. We'll switch over if Rosie's gotta leave and we'll come back to Allison.
Where's Rosie?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Allison. Sorry about that. I have a call at 11:30 with USDA, our standing daily call to get as much help from USDA as we can. So hard deadline there. So I'm Rosie Kruger. I'm the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. And I'm happy to talk to you today about all the work that that the agency and the folks in the field have been doing to feed kids since this crisis hit and since schools closed a couple weeks ago. But I wasn't entirely clear on what the ask was today. So if that's what you'd like to hear, I'm happy to talk to you about that. Or if you had specific questions, we can head in that direction as well.
Yeah, go ahead and, you know, we're,
Give us the bad news.
Actually, I have really good news for you.
There you go. Good.
So our programs have really stepped up to the plate and been amazing partners in this in feeding kids. So, you know, at the very beginning of March, our agency had a little bit of a heads up of what might happen, specifically child nutrition programs, because we happen to have a former colleague who now works for the child nutrition programs in Washington State. And so she was chatting with us about what was going on there. And so we started to think about, okay, if schools do have to close, how will kids get fed? Because it is as you all know, a critical resource for many kids in our state. The school meals programs are a really important part of their day. And so we have this option through USDA. When school is closed, the school meals programs can't operate, but the summer food service program can operate. So even though it's not summer, we're allowed to implement the summer food service program. So in the weeks leading up to the closure, my staff worked really hard to get all the schools in the state set up to do the summer food service program. This is something that normally takes us several months to do when we're actually getting ready for the real summer program, and we did it in a matter of days. And in the executive orders and in the messaging from the Agency of Education, it was made really clear to schools that it was a high priority to make sure that all their children were fed as schools closed. And so that was a really critical piece of leadership that meant that all of our schools took this really seriously and made this a priority. And that first week, that first Wednesday that schools were closed, we had schools that were already feeding children. By that Thursday, almost every single school in the state had figured out a way to feed the kids, and everyone was being fed by the following Monday. So most of the schools are using the summer food service program. The summer food service program is really ideal for this because it has a more flexible meal pattern. So it's a lot easier to serve what's called a reimbursable meal, and a meal that will get federal reimbursement from the feds than the school meals programs. It also has a higher reimbursement rate. So that program, we get about $3.15 for every lunch served and $2.37 for every breakfast served, which is higher than the school meals programs. In the school meals programs, we only get about $3.84 for every lunch served. So there is actually more reimbursement. And in the summer food service program, if a school qualifies as an open site, every single meal is reimbursed at that rate, versus in the school meals programs, as you know, most of the programs have to charge the kids who don't qualify economically for meals. We ran into a lot of trouble with this kind of open site versus closed site concept up until just this past weekend when things really improved. And that's because in the summer food service program, there are requirements that a site offering meals to all children 18 and under to be reimbursed for free for all the meals, that those open sites need to be what's called area eligible. So those sites need to hit a certain poverty threshold. Now, when we kind of had an idea that this was coming, my staff did a lot of work to make sure that we could make as many schools as possible in the state area eligible. And so we used every method allowed under the regulations. We looked back at claims for individual months and really did a lot of legwork looking at census tracts and other information. And we were able to make 2/3 of the schools in the state area eligible, which meant that 2/3 of the schools could go ahead and feed all their children for free using the summer food service program. The remaining schools were required to basically claim the meals by student status. So they were only able to serve their own children, not any children 18 and under. And they had to keep track of who was eating and claim based on the information that they had on file for those families already. And they would only get reimbursement for the meals served to children who were free and reduced eligible. However, this past weekend, USDA finally granted Vermont's waiver request to allow us to be more flexible in our area eligibility determination. So early this week, we put out information to the schools, letting them know that every school site in the state will qualify as area eligible. And if they want to add additional sites that aren't school-based, they just need to let us know kind of what the justification for that is. So that was a kind of a long-standing problem since this started, and it honestly feels like ages and ages ago, and it's hard to believe it's only been a few weeks. And so we spent a lot of effort. We wrote waiver requests to USDA. I have this daily call with USDA, and daily I and the other state directors in the region were kind of begging for some flexibility on this area eligibility question. And the delegation was also helpful in getting that pushed through USDA as well. So we're really glad to finally have that waiver. And I just want to flag that for you all, because you might have heard from some constituents who were concerned that we were having to do odd things like busing meals from one school to another and have them distributed out of a school that didn't make a lot of sense, and distributed around from there. And the reasons for that were all this area eligibility thing, which we've been able to resolve. Another thing I want to flag for you is the congregate feeding requirement. This was something early on that was a big problem, but we were able to get flexibility from USDA to waive. What's that?
And I just don't know who to speak to, and it's not my favorite thing, and I feel terrible for this woman, and she's actually crazy. I don't know.
Is somebody not on mute?
Amazing.
Who's on there?
Sure who I see there. Oh, Paulina,
Okay.
thank you.
So the congregate feeding requirement is normally a requirement in the summer meals program, where you can serve these meals, you can have an open site, any kid 18 and under can eat for free, but the meals have to be consumed on site and they have to be consumed all together. And obviously that is not something that makes sense at all in this situation. So early on, we applied for a non-congregate feeding waiver, and USDA fortunately approved it kind of right before we started doing all of this, and actually approved a nationwide waiver for those programs to allow non-congregate feeding, which allows us to operate a couple different options. So many schools are doing a kind of a grab and go situation where families can drive up and pick up a meal and leave. And we're allowing them to distribute multiple meals at a time and multiple days worth of meals. So family could pick up breakfast and lunch for that day, or if the school is doing multiple days of distribution, they may pick up several days worth of meals. But many schools in the state are taking advantage of the option to deliver the meals. So a lot of schools are actually delivering meals to bus stops or even to individual households using their school buses.
What happens, Rosie, when school closes?
You mean in June?
Yes.
So at that point, USDA has kind of waived a lot of these things until June 30th or until the COVID-19 emergency passes, whichever is sooner. So once the unanticipated school closure ends in June, we can go into regular summer feeding. And so, those 2/3 of those schools in the state who were area eligible, they could continue to feed students in the regular summer meals program. And the ones who aren't area eligible could continue to feed their own students and claim by student status. So that's an option. I think at this point, we're just kind of looking at the next couple months and figuring out how do we feed these families for the next couple months. It's possible that those waivers could get extended. We're kind of taking it a day at a time, looking ahead a bit, because we know that right now, while our schools are doing a great job and have a lot of capacity to serve these meals, that as food service staff and delivery staff get sick, which is sort of an inevitable thing, our capacity is really going to be reduced. And so we're trying to make plans, first of all, to give folks guidance so that staff don't get sick, to make sure that we're really giving very clear guidance about how to safely distribute meals in a way that doesn't put staff at risk. And we're working very closely with the Vermont Department of Health on that and making sure that any guidance that we give goes through them. And they've been wonderful partners there. So we're that's our first step, is to try and reduce the likelihood that people get sick as much as possible. But then we're also thinking about how can we be more agile in dealing with this problem when folks do get sick, and how do we shift production from one kitchen to another? How do we potentially allow some bulk meal distribution, which is a waiver we've got into USDA right now. So rather than serving individual sandwiches, you would serve maybe a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. And so that's something that's not currently allowed by USDA, but we're asking for some flexibility there. So kind of taking these interim steps to try and figure out, okay, we're doing this now. If that doesn't work as well, what flexibility do we have to change things up a little bit? And our state agency has really taken the approach that unless USDA tells us explicitly we can't do something, we're going to go ahead and give that flexibility and allow it. And that's been tricky. That means that sometimes we're out on a limb allowing something that USDA hasn't explicitly said is allowed. And so that's a little bit of a risk to take. But frankly, we're moving faster, and this is moving a lot faster than USDA is moving. And so sometimes we have to get out ahead of them. And that's
we appreciate that. So are there questions, Ruth?
Bobby,
Yeah, Chris?
put me on the list.
Yeah, Ruth, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Rosie, for everything you're doing. I've heard just great things from the field about the food service delivery, and I find it interesting, and maybe irony is not the right word, but we were having all these conversations about how could we do universal school lunches, and during this crisis, we basically are doing universal school lunches for anybody who needs them. And I really appreciate all the work you've done to get those waivers and to make sure that we can feed our kids. As I was saying in my other committee earlier, I walk down the street in my little town and of 350 people, and I see the coolers out for delivery of school meals. And it's just makes me happy to know that we were able to get that, or you and all the food service people in our schools were able to get that up so fast. And there was a question from my other committee about this whole idea of the, what you just mentioned, the bulk meals. I know some school districts actually are doing that, and they're having grocery pickup days where they are providing.
I don't want to hear that.
So, well, okay. So that's what was my question, is that's the waiver you're asking for? Is that what you're asking for? And or is it in your bulk meal?
Yeah, we're asking for some flexibility on that. And I should say, we have not submitted that waiver request because it's not a specific USDA regulation that we're asking for a waiver of. It's and you all are frozen, so I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. So USDA had given some guidance, because this is not anything that the regulations even contemplate.
Right.
Offering meals this way. So USDA had given some guidance in an FAQ they did like a week and a half ago that said that the meals need to be unitized. And so we have asked them to reconsider that guidance to allow us the flexibility to not unitize the meals. Milk, interestingly, doesn't need to be unitized. So we're letting folks know that if they don't want to distribute the little 8-ounce cartons, they can distribute, if they're doing multiple meals at a time or for multiple children, they can distribute a larger, gallon jug or half-gallon jug of milk. But at this point, the guidance from USDA says that the meals do need to be unitized. We're hearing from USDA that may change in guidance that's coming out. If it doesn't, then we'll go ahead and submit that waiver request. But again, we're not asking for regs to be waived. We're asking for specific recent guidance, and it's a little bit of a weird gray area.
Okay. Well, I think the schools that are doing it, just to make you feel better, are doing it through the food bank and just sort of
Yeah, we are seeing
partnering
a
with
lot
the
of
food
folks
bank
who are,
as a pickup site, basically.
yeah,
saying
so we
that the
are seeing
schools are
folks who
picking.
are distributing the meals to the children and their unitized meals, but then they're also adding additional food for the rest of the